Really appreciate the invitation because one of my first big brain dumps about water was at a league meeting that I just happened to hear about and come to, not even being a league member. So I'm really glad to be able to come back and fill in one of the gaps. So I'm going to be talking about a greater sort of picture of water in California. We're going to talk a lot about what the difference is between centralized heavy infrastructure management of water and then more localized management of water. But first we're going to go over a little bit more in detail what's going on with water in California at this moment. So we've got a bunch of water supply security issues. We've heard about some of them, which are have to do with population increase. We're expecting the population to grow another 19% in the next 20, well, not even 17 years. There's stormwater pollution. EPA's called that the greatest threat to water quality in the United States. We've got the Bay Delta health that you just heard about, Colorado River, surface water, and we're going to get into this stuff, and then the energy involved in moving, cleaning water around the state, dependence on large-scale and failing infrastructure. And then earthquake disasters. You just heard about climate change. We're all really up on climate change, reduced snowpack, right? More intense periods of rain and snow, which will cause a greater amount of erosion and runoff. And then that, again, continuing in cities to cover the landscape with impermeable surfaces, and therefore, again, increasing stormwater runoff. And then one of the biggest problems is a lot of us, it's not that we're ignorant in the sense that we don't want to know, we're just ignorant and that we haven't had the opportunity to learn yet. And so fortunately, that more and more information is starting to come out about water in California. Just in case you don't know, it's really important to understand the hydrologic cycle in anything that we're going to talk about today, because anything we're talking about plugs in somewhere along this cycle, right? And I also want to show you what the natural cycle is, because later we're going to talk about what our water use cycle is, and it doesn't look much like this. So you've got water coming out, it's stored in the ocean. It evaporates, some of that condenses and becomes stormwater. Water through storms, rain, snow, precipitation, that comes back down. Some of it infiltrates into groundwater. Some of the groundwater then seeps back into streams. So you see there's a whole, it is a beautiful circular system, and when it's happening that way, it cleans the water itself. There's a lot of natural capacity to treat water in this system. So then I want to talk about what a watershed is, because we're all living in watersheds, right? So a watershed is sort of shaped like this, like I am, right? Here's the headwaters, and then all these different tributaries, and it's all running down eventually into a main river or stream and coming out to an estuary. Here is a really great picture of watersheds that I think are over 700 square miles, says right up there, okay? Drainage greater than 700 square miles from USGBC. Beautiful, beautiful image of all the watersheds. So again, here my question is, what watershed are you made of? Okay, think about it. Your body is 70 to 75% water in volume. By weight, it's 60 to 90% of your weight. And that water is always replenishing. So whatever water you're drinking is the watershed that you're made of, right? So if you drink Mokelumne River water, that's the watershed that you physically are literally made of, right? And then all sorts of minerals and other things are coming into us through the food that's grown and whatnot. So it's a really important question. What watershed are you made of? And do you even care about that watershed and what happens to it, given that it's composing your body? Okay, and I like to ask myself, how many different watersheds am I living in? Okay, so, or am I a part of every single day, because there are smaller watersheds that fit into bigger watersheds. So I actually live in the Derby Creek watershed here in Oakland. If you ever want to find out what watershed you live in, there's an amazing set of maps of the whole Bay Area through the Museum of Oakland. So, okay, here's one watershed I live in. That's where I actually live, I use my toilet, I have gray water system, I have rainwater system, so what I do there has a big impact directly on that watershed. Happens that Derby Creek runs almost right under my house, which I figured out because I planted a little willow stalk from a flower arrangement about 6 years ago. Now it's 45 feet tall. And that's because willows love water, and that's because Derby Creek runs under. Okay, I also work in downtown Oakland, so that's a different watershed that I'm impacting while I'm at work. That's the San Antonio Creek watershed. So what I do, if I throw garbage on the street there, if I let my dog poop and that runs down into the stormwater, okay, I'm impacting that watershed. Whoops. And then my actual potable water supply comes from a different watershed. That's the Owens River, which we saw writ large in the last presentation amongst all the other watersheds that are feeding into the Bay Delta. So you can see where this watershed, how many people live in Oakland or get water from the Owens River? EB Mud. Okay, how many people have ever been to the Owens River? Right on. Thank you. Do you love your water supply more because you've been to that river and have seen it? I do. I know what fish live in that river. I've talked to them, right? Okay, so now here's a bigger watershed too that I'm a part of, which is the Bay Delta watershed. And so the point is, every action you take, whether you're at home, you're at work, you're impacting a watershed somewhere, and that watershed is actually creating people. All sorts of different things are made of water, right? So we're impacting all of these, just even if you only care about humans, you only care about yourself, you don't even care about other humans, just yourself, you should still care about your watershed. Even if you don't care about smelt, salmon, bears, beaver, badgers, any of that, you should still care about your watershed. Okay, so I'm not going to bother going through this since we just heard a lot about the Delta. It is the largest estuary on the west coast of North and South America. That's a big role for that watershed. An estuary, do you know how many migrating birds must come through there? All sorts of different creatures passing through this estuary. It's enormously important. Okay, here's another watershed where Californians get their water. It's the Colorado River watershed. It's about 1,440 miles long, but then there's another extra set of pipes to get it from Lake Mead to San Diego. San Diego gets about 90% of its water from the Colorado River watershed. Okay, and of course, you probably heard this watershed is having a horrible time at the moment. Lake Mead is dropping. The Colorado River no longer gets all the way to its own outlet in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a lot of damage in this watershed already, and it's starting to give up the ghost, so to speak. And so it could be that in another 10 to 20 years, there won't be more water to take from the Colorado, and then San Diego hopefully will find something besides desalination to solve their problems. Okay, and then here's yet another watershed where a lot of water comes from in California. This is the Owens River watershed, where a lot of, again, Southern California, Imperial Valley especially, gets its water. And they do that in large part for farming purposes. Okay, and here again is the Owens River aqueduct. Just partially, this is to show you how much heavy-duty infrastructure is involved in moving. If we're not taking water locally, how are we getting it around to where we want it to be? If we live in a desert, then how are we going to grow all of our oranges there, right? Or our lawns there. Okay, so then if instead you look at localized water management, let's just talk about so if we were going to follow the water cycle and do as much as we can to stay within that cycle without interrupting it, what might that look like? Well, okay, first thing we want to do if we are doing localized water management is we want to mimic the natural hydrology. We want to think about it as a whole system. And even in my work, we do, Holy H20 does water education and outreach on water conservation, rainwater, gray water, stormwater abatement, and black water reuse. So I can't just think about rainwater. I have to think about how rainwater works with gray water and what does that have to do with stormwater, and then what's the kind of waste management needed with these kinds of different technologies, right? You gotta think about the whole system because anything you do in one area is gonna impact another. They put low flow toilets all over San Francisco. Who doesn't wanna have more low flow toilets? But guess what happened? There wasn't enough water flow to keep moving the sewage all the way. They have a gravity system. And so they started having explosions in the pipes because of methane. And that's because they were using low flow toilets, right? And we want that, but there are unintended consequences. So, okay, so let's just look at, again, different options. First one, natural ground cover, not very much covering the ground, and so there's a lot of infiltration. There's not very much runoff. There's also a ton of evapotranspiration, which we really like. Then you cover it a little bit, less evapotranspiration, more runoff, less infiltration. Again, you see all the way up till what we do, for the most part, this kind of covering our earth with impervious surfaces ends up very little evapotranspiration, very, very, very little infiltration, and a lot of runoff. And again, runoff is one of our major issues. Okay, so this is the kind of neighborhoods that we've been known to build here in the United States in particular. Okay, that's pretty much all impervious except for some lawns, right? EPA, we've been through this. So what happens if we have all this urban runoff? Well, you could put your kids out front and let them drink the storm water. I'm not sure whose idea that was. I love it when somebody saw this picture, they said, but it's okay because the water came from the hose. Okay. That's one way to think about it. Okay, and issues with the way that we're currently using water. We use a vast amount of water for energy production, thermoelectric production. 49% of our total water use, 41% of total freshwater withdrawals, and 53% of freshwater surface withdrawals goes to creating energy. So when you're using energy, you're using water. Okay, good to keep in mind. I just love this picture. It's sort of like the whole cycle. That's pumping water up and over the Tehachapi, and there's the oil to try and get enough energy to pump it up and over the Tehachapi, right? 2% of the state's energy goes to moving that water up and over to LA. Okay, so localized water management, what are we looking for? We want to preserve natural characteristics, the least amount of interruption in the way that things already are, if that's possible. That naturally, we want to reduce the stormwater, we want to improve the quality of surface runoff, we want to increase groundwater recharge, reduce the inappropriate use of potable water, reduction of black water, and then get people connected. If you have a localized water system, you're hauling your water, say. I've done that. I've lived in Panama, hauled my water. Now every time I turn on the tap, I know how much a gallon is because I've carried 5 or 10 of them around a lot. Okay, and this is, again, what we're looking for. As much as possible, what we're looking for is very little runoff, what they call stormwater reuse. Stormwater reuse is simply rainwater, right? And then we want to match our water source with the end use, okay? What are you using that water for, and what's the most appropriate water to use for that? If you're flushing toilets, is potable water the most important? I'm gonna really have to whip through these. Our supply, here's our rainfall, here's all of the rivers, and here's all the piping that we use to move everything around, right? These are all of our different water projects. We're the most heavily transformed place in the world, hydrologically transformed. The other place we get water from is aquifers, right? Amazing amount of overpumping, the overpumping. 1925, that's where the land was. 1977, subsidence. Once an aquifer is drained, you can't put more water back in and pump it back up to where it was before. That storage capacity is now lost. And you can see part of the reason that so much groundwater is gone is because there is no rain in the middle of the state, but that's where a lot of the agriculture is. So they're pumping groundwater to do that. We're using water in all these different ways. We're using it much more than other countries. Here we've got Australia compared to us, except for it looks like they take more showers than us. Go figure, right? Okay. We're one of the cities most likely to run out of water or to have serious water shortages in the next 50 years. So we recycle water, we treat water, and this is the way water now could be used. Instead of running out, just everything you use in your house running out back to the wastewater treatment, instead, what if it goes, some of it gray water from your bathroom and laundry, and it gets used, again, not just on the outside, but on the inside. There they do toilet flushing. They use it in laundry machines. They use it for all sorts of things, right? And so the options we have instead of these kind of heavy duty are localized water strategies, which are water conservation, shower heads, aerators, low flow, right? All these low flow things. And then we've got rainwater harvesting, another amazing. Let me give you, I know I'm out of time, one quick statistic. If you have 1,000 square foot roof and 1 inch of rain, 1 inch of rain, you get 600 gallons of water. So we get 22 inches of rain around here. I'm working on a project in West Oakland where the part of the roof that we're capturing can capture over 3 million gallons. Okay, this is all stormwater management. We want to infiltrate stormwater. We do it through infiltration, permeable pavement, through living machines, gray water, and then this is what you have instead. Okay, thank you very much.